Welcome back. Today we do a quick one on the Kiwi Ears Canta, which is their single dynamic driver dual planar hybrid IEM, which is this guy in the black. But before we do that, I did want to kind of touch on their new dongle, which is this one, the Allegro Mini. The Mini is the smaller version of the Allegro, which was this one. But this one is actually kind of interesting. I mean, for a few reasons. One, it's affordably priced. It's about $25, I believe. It does have 4.4, it does have 3.5, and it is this kind of really small style that just kind of plugs right into your phone. If you happen to have kind of a small phone like this, it just kind of jams in like that, and you're kind of off and running on that way. So I thought that was actually pretty cool. I haven't tried one of these in a while. I had a couple, I think the Muse ones, the older ones. This one definitely sounds a lot better. And why I want to talk about it in kind of relative to Canta is precisely that. I typically look at dongles being more neutral, more kind of flat response, very extended on both ends. Those are kind of the dongles that I like. But occasionally you run into a set like Canta, which has quite a bit of upper treble energy, and you pair that with a dongle that isn't necessarily fully extended. It has a slight maybe roll off in the treble or maybe on both ends, but it just doesn't really feed into the over-energetic style of tuning that Canta has, and it kind of brings it back down into a less fatiguing, kind of a better level for my ears. That's kind of what Allegro Mini does for Canta, and I thought it was actually a good pairing for that reason, and not a typical reason that I typically point out when talking about dongles. But yeah, this one happened to strike me in the right way, and I'll talk about the EQ later with Canta and kind of why that the dongle actually plays right into that quite well. So this is what it looks like up close, kind of a nice black shell. I think resin, I'm not sure if this is actually metal, but it's quite nice. It's a really nice design. Nice black shells. It's actually a quite nice build. You also do get a case inside the box. You do get a cable, which looks like this, kind of a average stock cable. You do get 3 sets of tips. So you get the red set, the black set, and the kind of the white silicone set. So I think these are 3 sets that Kiwi Ears has used before as well. So I don't think those are new, but something that we've seen before from them. So we'll kind of jump into it there and say what is it, and kind of exactly what I talked about. It is a single dynamic driver. It is a dual planar hybrid, and it's pretty unique, right? You don't see too many dual planars around these days. So does it actually sound like a dynamic driver and a planar at the same time? I think the answer is yes. They actually kept them separated enough that you can clearly, distinctly hear both styles of drivers, and dynamic driver sounds kind of exactly the way you thought it would sound. They put a nice little bass shelf in, so it's a kind of a very present dynamic driver. The planars are actually boosted quite a bit, so you do get quite a lot of presence of the mids and the upper range. And to that point, what is important to know about Canta is they call it a vocal-centric tonality. And I think some people will look at that and say, well, that means very, very nice lush mids, but it isn't exactly what they meant. It's more of a vocal forward, or pushing the vocals very much kind of. I would just say that they just pushed them quite forward, and it's sort of unmistakable what they did here. So when we look at the graph, and I would say that NF Audio's NM2+, I think NF Audio does this style tuning quite well. They've been doing it forever, and they would call this a professional style tuning. It's a tuning that really emphasizes the vocal area. So on Canta, we can kind of see where NM2 is very much a neutral bright, kind of a lower bass shelf. On Canta, they did do a full style bass shelf. The dynamic driver is very present. You will hear it there. But as we get into the upper mids, you can kind of see where NM2+ in the blue, that is what I think NF Audio, that's a pretty typical style, or pretty typical for NF Audio to boost the upper mids quite a bit. So you can see Canta is still boosted, but not quite as much. And just the way I think NF Audio would typically roll this down just a little bit. They really want all the emphasis right here, and that's typically what NF Audio does. For Canta, we see that there's actually a boost here, but then there also is this more of a treble, upper treble, more emphasis that kind of lays on top of the vocals. So they kind of double down on pushing the whole treble area quite forward. So while I said there is a nice bass shelf, there's a lot of this, and that's very much how I would describe their vocal centric. Is really pushing those front and center much more in front of the bass, and definitely much more even in front of the treble. The whole thing is really pushed forward, so unmistakable vocal forward sound. So the sound, it's really boosted at both ends, but really popping the vocals forward and having a complementary bass shelf so it doesn't sound too bright or thin. That's kind of what they did here. But, they left it a bit lower for a brighter sound. So when you look at the balance here, you can kind of say, well, this bass shelf actually looks quite beefy. It's going to balance off nicely, but it's not really. It's like this is kind of a nice bass shelf, but when they double down on both of these boosts, that tends to lean this whole thing on the bright side. And so, yes, there is some bass there, but there is very much a bright sound to it. And it's not surprising. It does do a distinct dynamic driver sound and a planar upper sound by having this really boosted quite a bit, and then having this as, a nice boost as well. I think they boosted both ends so you can hear both drivers at the same time. Kind of an interesting way to do it. I'm not sure it was my favorite way to do it, but certainly an interesting take on doing this. So does it have that dynamic driver sound? It does have that dynamic driver sound. It's kind of sitting below the upper range. So it's not as present as the graph shows, or I should say, its presence will vary with the treble. The more that you hear this boosted and elevated, the less you're going to get of the bass shelf. But just listening to the bass alone, it actually kind of sounds like that. It's quite a nice bass shelf. But again, behind the brighter upper range, it'll be a little bit less present. It is almost a 10 dB bass shelf, so it is there. It's just kind of under the vocal-centric tonality that they used. So the mids, and I would say on one hand, Kiwi Ears tried something new. They paired a dynamic driver and a planar. I think that's kind of a unique thing to do. But leaving the balance on the upper range for the vocal emphasis, there really is a ton of clarity between the upper mids and the treble levels. There's a lot there. Quite forward, push forward, and on a driver pair that can clearly do sharp and clear vocals without the need for extra boost. And I think that's sort of where I got lost in this style tuning was they've got a dual planar, two planar drivers. And when you just listen to the planar drivers, they are very sharp and very clear. And even without the boost, I think they would have been as sharp and as clear. And they didn't really need to push it as far as they did. And I understand that they wanted to make this vocal-centric in a way that NF Audio does as well. And you really push it, really overemphasize it so the vocals really pop out. But, if they had just pulled it back a little bit, I think the vocals would have been right there as well. It's not like they're going to get behind the bass at all. The bass is kind of fine the way it was. But, yeah, I think they just pushed it a little bit further, a little bit more forward than I would have preferred. But I sort of understand, again, with their vocal-centric tonality, why they did that. And I think the treble, again, very much lots of upper, lots of lower treble, lots of upper treble. It has lots of emphasis and a really clean edge to the mids. But this was very much a delicate operation. You're really forcing a lot of clarity to the mids at the expense of sounding a little bit less natural, right? All these are pushed quite forward. And in NF Audio's world, on professional audio recording and mixing, they really want to have a certain sound to it that is very vocal-centric, but not so much enjoying music, but in a professional environment. And so to hear Canta, where they sort of boosted the bass of this is perhaps a more musical style tuning, but still have a push to the vocals in that way, it's sort of a half musical, half professional, vocal-centric style. So not quite in the same vein that NM2 did it, but, kind of in the same realm of it anyway. So stage, again, this will be a fun stage because there is lots of width and height from the treble, but it's a little bit too bright, and that tends to flatten the stage. That's exactly what here. But there is a ton of treble energy, and that will give you a very wide stage, a very high stage, and it's very noticeable right out of the bat. But, as far as depth, it's a little bit harder to pull that off with this amount of boost in that area. So that is what I got on Kiwi Ears Canta. So thank you guys again for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.